Uncovering the Mysteries of VRS and Work, presented by Pacer's Project Launch and Minnesota Disability Law Center. Our speakers today are Delaine, who is a legal advocate, and Kristina, who is a supervising attorney at the Minnesota Disability Law Center.
I am Kristina Petronko, and it's my colleague Delaine Remes, and we're excited to talk to you about VR and about transition services for youth moving to employment. You know, in part, we just didn't want to spend tons of time telling you about what we do if you knew about us, but we see a lot of you haven't heard of our office before, so we'll have Delaine take it away with some information about the Disability Law Center.
That sounds great, but before I do, my name is Delaine Remes, and I'm an advocate with the Minnesota Disability Law Center. So the Disability Law Center is the designated protection advocacy organization in Minnesota. There's an office like ours in every state. We're federally funded, and we're part of Midman Legal Aid in Minnesota. Our responsibilities include legal support. We monitor facilities, nursing homes, group homes, mental health facilities, as well as all different kinds of facilities or services that support people with disabilities. We also have a new rep payee program that reviews representative payees who manage Social Security, and that grant is specific to both monitoring rep payees, but also interviews Social Security recipients who are getting rep payee services from that person. And that's a brand new grant program the last few years through Social Security. We provide services through the whole state. We are free legal services, and we have some limitations because I think there's only about 24 of us. So we do have some case priorities, and we follow what our grants, kind of what our priorities are based on our federal funding or our grants. So next slide. The Disability Law Center is a little different than other advocacy organizations and legal aid offices. So we're completely free, but the disability issue has to be specific. The legal issue has to be specific to a person's disability. We have no income guidelines. Some of our legal aid offices require that you're low income or a certain percentage of poverty in order to get through the door to get legal services. The Disability Law Center doesn't have any legal or any income guidelines. So it doesn't matter how much money you or the guardian or the family have. Our staff members are advocates and attorneys, and we have an office in Minneapolis, Duluth, Fertile, Minnesota, and Mankato. The Disability Law Center also provides policy advocacy. We're really, we get involved and we have members sitting on a lot of advisory committees with the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as the Department of Education and Vocational Rehab Services. We work collaboratively with other agencies and work on systems issues to try to help more people, the majority of people possible, with systems advocacy. We provide education like this presentation, and we provide technical assistance. So I saw there's quite a few service providers. If you have a question about a legal issue or an individual right or the law for a client or a family that you're working with, you could call us and we can provide technical assistance as far as what the law says and what the rights of the individual are, and give you some information to share with the individual or the family. Today we're here primarily to talk about vocational rehab services. And we have a specific grant through the federal funding that's called the Client Assistance Project. We call it CAP. And I always consider CAP kind of like the grievance for people who aren't happy with state services for the blind or voc rehab services. So if you are a person applying for voc rehab services, or a guardian or a service provider trying to help somebody get vocational rehab services or state services for the blind, our office helps people know what their rights are to apply. We can give some information about eligibility criteria. And if you're denied services or you're not happy with the services, people can call us and we evaluate the case. We advise clients on what their legal rights are or their options to advocate for themselves. We negotiate with vocational rehab or state services for the blind if if the case has legal merit and we feel that it falls within our priorities. We represent clients in mediation and appeals with vocational rehab services. And we serve on the State Rehabilitation Council as well as the State Rehabilitation Council for the blind. And again, to kind of look at the policy and advocate for individual rights for people with disabilities to access the services. So if you're interested, or you have a client who's interested in getting help from the Disability Law Center through our Client Assistance Project or other any of our other grants, the way to get in contact with us is to call our intake line. We are partnered with Midman Legal Aid, and we have intake specialists. You can call the 1-800 number if you're in Greater Minnesota, or the 612 number if you're in the metro area. And those are the hours of our intake, but they'll get all the basic information from you. We also have great resources, and we'll share this later, but we have fact sheets that you can access through that link. And our website also kind of gives information, as well as certain links to more of our resources, fact sheets, and just tells you a little bit more about the Disability Law Center.
And just one thing that's maybe important to know is, as Delaine was saying, we're part of Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, and we are the protection and advocacy system for Minnesota. We are not funded by the state, we're not part of state government, and we're not part of VRS or SSB. So I'm about to give you a bunch of information about what they do, but that's not what we do. So just to make sure that people understand that. Okay, so vocational rehabilitation is a general term which refers to services that help people with disabilities who want to get employment. And so we often refer to it as VR, and in Minnesota, VR, or vocational rehabilitation, is split between two different services, or sorry, two different state agencies. One state agency is Vocational Rehab Services, or VRS. The other state agency is State Services for the Blind, or SSB. So you might be wondering who goes to which. So for vocational rehab services, serves almost everyone with disabilities except people who have visual impairments, who are blind, have low vision, or who are deafblind. And clients who have those types of disabilities work with State Services for the Blind. So that's kind of the breakdown between the two different agencies. And throughout this presentation, you'll see, and we'll often refer to VR. And when we say VR, we mean vocational rehabilitation generally, and it's a little bit of a shorthand for the two agencies. So what do they do? I told you that they help people with disabilities who want to work. What kind of work? They help people get a job in the community. So a lot of people refer to that as competitive integrated employment, which means most jobs that you're used to thinking about in the community. It does not mean work like center-based work, or work in a sheltered workshop, or work for less than minimum wage or sub-minimum wage. And what's a little bit different is that VR has services that help anyone of working age and preparing for working age, so starting about 14 until people throughout their lifespan and throughout their working age. But they also have some really specific programs that are designed to help youth and students with disabilities. So we're going to give you background about VR generally, and then also share information, because we know for a lot of you, that's kind of the age group that you're interested in, is students with disabilities and youth with disabilities. And so I think we can actually go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so eligibility, how do you get these services from VR? So you have to meet the requirements, which is that you have a disability that makes it hard to get a job or keep a job, and that you're going to need help, either to find the job, to get ready and train for a job, or keep a job once you have it. And for people with who are receiving Social Security disability benefits, like SSI and SSDI, they're presumed eligible. If you're not getting disability benefits, you can still be eligible. You just have to tell the counselor, the vocational rehab counselor, more about what your medical conditions are, and sometimes they'll ask to get medical records from your doctor, from other medical professionals in your life. Usually at this point in the presentation, like a couple years ago, we would have told you all about this very complicated waiting list process that's called order of selection, which is kind of complicated, but luckily we don't have to right now, because there's no waiting list. If you apply for VR services and you are eligible for services, you get services right away and you are not put on a waiting list. So I'm not going to walk through that. We're just going to go ahead and skip right over it.
Kristina, we had one question, whether or not this is for Minnesota residents only.
It's a good question. So this particular agencies that I'm talking about and some of the particular policies that I talk about are Minnesota specific, but every state has a vocational rehab agency, and a lot of the services are governed by federal law, and so across the country things are similar. There might be some specifics that are different under different state laws and policies, but generally, you know, if you're in Pennsylvania or Hawaii or Alaska, there's a VR agency that can help. And similarly, there's an office like ours that can help, a client assistance project if you're running into problems, and a protection and advocacy organization if you're having problems generally. So those all information is all out there. And thank you, Deborah. I can't really see the chat very well, so please feel free to interrupt. Okay, so you might ask, how is it that VR will help? So like, let's say, great, you just told me you can apply, you just told me it's actually pretty fast to get services these days, but what is it that they're gonna help me do? So it depends a little bit on where you are in your life and where you are in your job search plan. But let's say you're, you know, a youth who is just at the beginning of thinking about what you wanna do with your life and your career. The way that VR is going to help you is that they are going to help put together what's called an individualized plan for employment. Very confusingly, an IPE, not an IEP, but an IPE. And you'll spend the first 90 days or less of your relationship with your VR counselor trying to figure out, you know, what is my job goal? Like maybe you know that you want to, you know, work in the tech industry and that you know you're going to need to go to college and get a computer science degree. Or you know that you definitely want to be a carpenter and work in construction and that is your path. And so you're going to need to do some training and an apprenticeship. If you're that certain, then that will be your job goal on your individualized plan for employment. And VR will walk through with you. Okay, well, what do we need to get there? What training do we need, both, you know, specific for that job goal? What kind of other more like soft skills do you need? What information about how to interact with people in the workforce? What kind of, you know, do you need help with clothes for an interview or tools for the apprenticeship program? There's going to be a lot of different things, and it all depends on the job goal. So if maybe you know, if you only take a couple things away from this presentation today, the one big thing is everything that VR helps you do is related to the job goal that is listed on your individual plan for employment. And so when you're working on that process, you want to make sure that you are specific about what you want, if you know, or if as time goes on, you get more idea of what you want, then you want to update your individual plan for employment. And then also you want to make sure that everything that's listed, everything that you think VR is going to pay for and help you with is listed on that individualized plan for employment. So it's really key that that plan includes the information and services that you feel like you need. And there's a huge range. We're going to walk through some of the different services today, but we are not going to get to everything. And then, you know, and your VR counselor's job is to help you really figure out what are all of the things that VR can provide to help support you along the way. And then if you have questions or you don't feel like you're getting that support or you don't quite understand the range of options, feel free to call our office at the Client Assistance Project. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit confusing. Actually, just back one, Jamie. Thank you. So one thing that's going to be a little confusing is I'm going to tell you about two different types of services for usually students, about high school students. So they're kind of, they're not two different paths, but they're overlapping. So the first thing is individual services. And those individual services look just like I told you. You know, you apply for services, you know, hopefully you're found eligible and you start getting services. You develop the individualized plan for employment. You know, make sure you get things on there like transportation to and from your summer internship or your summer job, or, you know, the books you need to prepare for that summer job. And you are assigned to a VR counselor. That's the person you work with one-on-one. that VR counselor is supposed to come to your IEP meetings at school. And if you have a Medicaid waiver, they're supposed to come to your person-centered planning meetings when you invite them. So very important, invite them. So that is, it's going to work in a much more traditional way that VR works. There are also some services for people who have not yet applied for VR services, and that will be the next slide. Okay, so if you all have interacted with the world of vocational rehabilitation or just a lot with youth 14 to 24, you may have heard about the law that was passed in 2014, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA. And so this law created some additional services for youth with a huge focus on helping youth with disabilities, get to the jobs that they want and the careers that they want long term. And so one of the goals was to provide what are called pre-employment transition services, or pre-ETs, for youth that are 14 to 21 who have a disability. And these are services that are provided as more like as a group. They're not that individual one-on-one. It's more some like group training, usually for students with disabilities, as they're trying to figure out, gosh, what do I want to do? What would that look like? Let me try out some jobs. Let me do some informational interviews. That kind of exploration, really. And so in Minnesota, this is kind of taken a couple of different forms as the implementation of that new law went into effect. But the way it looks now is these services, they're called pre-ETs, and they're provided either by VRS staff or in some places by a community rehabilitation provider, which is usually just like an organization that specializes in working with people with disabilities on various different things, including employment. So what's different about pre-employment transition services is that you don't have to actually apply to VRS to get those services, or to SSB. You have to fill out a quick application, and that your school or the VR counselor assigned to your school should give you this, but you don't have to go through the whole process of providing medical information and being found eligible for VR services. But as the flip side of that, there's short-term services that are not tailored specifically necessarily to you, and they don't come with the other services that we're talking about, like help with transportation or counseling or books or the other things you might need, assistive technology, for instance. Okay, next slide. So the types of services that are provided by pre-employment transition services, or pre-ETs, are listed on the screen. So thinking about what you want to do, is that job exploration counseling. Work-based learning opportunities can mean a variety of different work internship opportunities that let you see, what would this job be like? Like, okay, you say you want to work with animals, but what would it actually be like to work in the vet's office? Is that the job you want? Do you want to become a vet someday? Or would you rather work at, with animals in a different setting? Like, would you rather work like on the farm or something like that? Then there's also counseling about different types of post-secondary education, including comprehensive transition programs. So that's looking at, what type of college or training programs or graduate school do I need to get the type of job I want? And what would it mean to go to one of those programs, and what would that be like? Let me talk to some students who are doing that. What would it be like to, for students with my type of disability, how, what kind of services would be available or support? Then there's workplace readiness training. Those are kind of the, again, the soft skills I was talking about before. Like, you got to show up on time. You need to know how to be professional. You need to, do how to different things. And then instruction and self-advocacy, because that's going to be an important part of any path to career, is, trying to figure out how to advocate for yourself based on your needs. Next slide. Okay, so I've just kind of run through a lot of information about what things should look like, and there's a lot of information on VRS and SSB's website that you'll find there. And there are also specific staff that I've listed on the slide that you can talk to that are focused on services for students with disabilities 14 to 21. Next slide. And at this point, I will turn it over to Delaine to take it away about what happens after graduation and what should VRS be helping you with.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Kristina. I'll tell you, as far as after graduation, there's not any pre-ETS classes and really not much group activity. It's more individualized. So again, vocational rehab services or state services for the blind are there, and they're funded to help you obtain and maintain a job consistent with what your interests and abilities are. Just like when they work individually with youth in transition, they'll help you develop an individual plan for employment, an IPE, and you want to include as much detail in that IPE as possible as far as what help you do need to reach your employment goal. They'll provide other services like certain assessments, job counseling, job placement, technical assistance, and in some cases supported employment services, and some work expenses along the way. A few of the things that Kristina mentioned, if you need a uniform for your job and that's something you're on a very limited budget that you need, that may be something that vocational rehab can pay for. They also do the assessments free, and they do job counseling free. So there's not an expense to getting voc rehab services, but they do offer a lot of varieties of services. They fund tuition and small businesses expenses, and we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about small businesses in the future. But for tuition, they do provide funding for some tuition. They are the payer of last resort. So if you were, let's say, going to a state college or have chosen a college and that's part of your employment goal, you would first go through FAFSA, the federal loan program and federal grant program, to see if you would qualify for FAFSA and get that funding first. But if it was approved in your employment plan for you to go to post-secondary college and there's still a balance of funding, you could get some funding assistance from vocational rehab to pay for that. And then free services necessary to get and keep a job. Sometimes people get into a job and things work well for a while, but they have some there are some things with the job that require some new accommodations or some assistive technology, or some type of adaptation to accommodate their disability, and that may show up a month or two after working there. So that's reaching back to vocational rehab services and getting some additional assistance to those who are eligible. Other ways that vocational rehab services can help youth after graduation. One big one, I'm in the Mankato Disability Law Center office, and one big one for a lot of us out here in Greater Minnesota is transportation. Vocational rehab can pay for transportation to and from vocational rehab appointments, whether it's using public transportation, or they also can reimburse you for mileage with your own vehicle. They can pay for treatment to correct an impairment so that you can work. Some examples are prosthetic devices, eyeglasses, mental health treatment or therapies that aren't paid for by another funding source. So if you have insurance or medical assistance that would pay for those, vocational rehab services is always the payer of last resort. And vocational and training services, again, including tuitions, fees, books, materials, and other things to make sure that you get to access vocational experiences in order to reach your employment goal. So whatever it is that you would need to make that a possibility for the person. Some examples of vocational rehab services, some additional examples are technology, including vehicle modifications to make your vehicle accessible, telecommunications and sensory devices, occupational licenses, tools, equipment. I always think about a person who maybe is going to, work as a carpenter and has certain, they have to get kind of their basic carpentry tools and tool case and maybe a belt and things that they would need in order to do the job. So initial stocks and supplies can be covered by vocational rehab services. Personal assistance services, for some individuals who Their job, their employment goal, let's say, is to work in retail, but maybe due to their disability, they might need some help with daily activities. They can get personal assistance services. We've heard of some pretty creative programs where individuals have gotten personal assistance services that just come in every 3 hours to help them with what they need, and then the personal assistance services leave and the person works for another 3 hours. So it can be very individualized. And then technical assistance and consultation services for self-employment and small business. And again, we're going to spend some time talking more about that.
The VR can help with that cost of training and education. And so it's important if your job goal is going to involve some post-secondary training, whatever that looks like, and cost is always going to be a concern for people. You want to think about what options are out there, and before you would take out any loans, you want to see what VR would be able to cover, because you shouldn't be obligated to take out loans if VR can pay. And it gets, we're going to tell you, it gets really complicated about which school you go to, and if it's a private college, they're going to pay for less than if you go to a state program, and it's going to depend if it's the closest state program to your house or not. It's complicated, but the most important thing, I think, is just to know that that is a possibility, and so that you are talking to VR about that being both your goal and asking them for how they can help. And just for those other things along the way, like the books, the supplies, the technology that you need, transportation, all of those different pieces you want to be thinking about. And as Delaine was talking about, VR won't pay first. And one thing that we don't have a slide about, but that is maybe just important to understand, is something called consumer financial participation. So VR services, a number of them are just free in themselves. And then some people can be asked to pay a portion of something, like of their tuition or of their transportation, but it depends on their income, and it depends on and sometimes on their family's income. And the biggest thing to know is if you're getting SSI or SSDI based on your disability, you don't have to chip in. You don't have to participate as part of that consumer financial participation. And the same is true if you're getting government assistance like MFIP or general assistance. So that is something that VR will go over with you in the beginning, but I just want to put that out there to make sure people know that that is part of the policy. So one other thing is it can get complicated when you're trying to figure out the tuition piece, and maybe there's a really good reason that you need to go to a private school. And we have an example, actually, the slide that's up, the YouTube link is a video that we've made as part of a project called Into Adulthood that we'll be talking about in a little bit. But it's about a college student who had a really good reason for needing to go to a private college close to his home, close to his support network, where he was going to get the programs and services he needed. And he needed some help with advocating to VR about why he needed to do this. And one of our fantastic advocates, Ann Robertson, helped him with that. And they're both in the video talking about that. So we just want to let you know that it can get complicated, and we are here if you need, even if it's just, it seems like maybe this is the right policy, but I don't know. I want someone to double check. We can take a look and if you're concerned. But job placement is a really important one because it is a big part of what VR helps with. And so it's from that very beginning of, gathering the information that you need for a job application, applying for jobs, looking online, knowing where to look online, helping you prepare for the interview, helping you pay for an clothes to go to a job interview, the cost to get to that job interview. And then, let's say, great, the job interview went super well, and then they offer you the job, and the VR, the placement staff is there to help you, negotiate with the employer about maybe the terms of the job. It could be about the accommodations that you need, if that's something you want to disclose at that time. So job placement is a big part of what VR helps with, and sometimes you're going to get help from staff that work directly for VR agencies, and sometimes that service is going to be contracted out with a community rehab provider that is going to provide that service and has expertise in that area. And so when you're choosing between different providers, you're supposed to have an informed choice about, what providers are available, how many are there, where are they located, what's their style, and then sometimes there's even information about, what have other consumers, how have they felt about these different providers in the past, and there are some surveys that are done by the agencies finding out from VR consumers, people who are getting those services, how they felt about services with company X or company Y. The one thing though, I do want to kind of dispel a myth. Sometimes clients tell me, look, it's fine, I want a job, and VR just has a list of all the jobs that are available for people with disabilities. And then I just want them to like pick one of those jobs for me, or I'll pick from that list, and then I want that job. I just want to, like, that is not how it works. People, you will be applying for a job just like everyone else through the process of that everyone else follows. And VR is there, the placement staff is there to help you navigate that process. But they don't just have a list of jobs, because it's all supposed to be about what you want and the type of job you want, not just a list of jobs that people might want. And then small business, as Delaine was saying, this is like a really important option. And, I think in the pandemic, people starting small businesses has really risen. And, I imagine that requests for VR to help pay for small business will also rise over time. And so they will help you through the process. They will help contract with a business consultant who will help you do research, put together a business plan. You then present that business plan to VR, and then they actually have outside, both internal staff who review it, and then an outside person review it to make sure it's a viable business, because they're not going to help fund it if it's probably not going to help you make any money, right? That's why you're starting the business, is you have to make sure it's going to be viable and that people want it. And as Delaine was saying, VR will help pay for some of those startup costs you need. Like, I worked with a client who was starting her own massage therapy business. And so they were able to help with the equipment she needed, the supplies, the cost of her license, all of those kind of different pieces, helping sometimes pay for a work experience with somebody who was established so that she could understand how the business works, because that wasn't really covered in her training program. So there are a lot of different opportunities. And this again can be an area where there can be complications. And so again, if you're running into issues or you're not getting the support that you feel like you need, please feel free to call our office.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add to your the small business, because we have had quite a few cases of individuals who have called Client Assistance Project to get help getting additional services from vocational rehab services for the small business. And it really does have to be something that's viable. And it goes through that process of looking at the small business development specialist or a state national chartered lending institute or a micro enterprise. So you have to present your plan and it has to be approved. So it's got to be something that's deemed going to be viable, and that can be kind of tough. But we've helped people with that. So that's something you could call us about. And assistive technology, if you need any type of assistive technology or modification in order to do the duties of the job to reach your employment goal, Voc Rehab can help fund that. And this is really helpful when a person finds something they're interested in, but there may be something within the office or within the working environment that they need in order to help them be successful at that job. And so accommodations, modifications, a stand-up desk or a cutout or something to make the space more accessible, or equipment, taped books, alternate programs on your computer, anything that can happen, or any piece of equipment that you can use that would help you achieve the employment goal or do the job can be funded through Voc Rehab services. Voc Rehab provides the least costly rehabilitation technology. That's kind of a repeat thing, because the most reasonable or cost efficient is what they will provide. We've got some good examples of that we've had cases where the person maybe wants the top of the line adaptive equipment or something that a friend has, but there's one that costs a little bit less that can do the exact same thing. You have to make a real specific request if you want to spend the more money. If there's something that does the same thing, sometimes vocational rehab only has to pay for the least costly. But they can also do repairs sometimes to adaptive equipment or modification adaptations to a vehicle. If it's previously owned vehicle and not a new vehicle, there are certain conditions that vocational rehab can pay for that, and you have to follow those within the policy. Transportation, one of my key barriers to access to a lot of things in greater Minnesota. So vocational rehab can provide transportation only when necessary to secure or retain the job or to get access to voc rehab services. They can pay for the actual cost of the most cost efficient transportation. So oftentimes they'll pay for public transportation if transportation is available. And that's all they're required to pay for. They can reimburse 16 cents a mile if public transportation is not available or not available at the time that you're going to work. And they will not purchase or lease or obtain or insure vehicles. So they kind of have limits. They do. This is something that we saw in policy when we were working on the PowerPoint. They can pay for public transportation. If public transportation is available and you choose to drive your own car, they can pay 16 cents a mile, but no more than the cost of what it would cost to take public transportation. So if for some reason you need to use your own vehicle, and especially if it is directly linked to accommodating your disability, that's something we can advocate for. And they can cover costs of transportation if there's no transit available, no public transit, and you don't have your own car. They can pay for post-secondary training, and that's limited. And voc rehab can pay for vehicle repairs only when certain conditions are met. And they have a maximum here of $1,000 a year. So if you need your car to drive from Le Sueur to Mankato to get to your job and to work with vocational rehab services on any of their services, and your car breaks down, they can help pay for some car repairs if it's directly linked to your services and your employment plan.
So benefits counseling. I think for a lot of people, they are really worried about working and how working and the income that they get from working is going to affect their government benefits. And, I think one of the biggest things is people are concerned that they're going to lose their Social Security disability benefits like SSI and SSDI. And I think PACER has recorded presentations that have a ton of information about, how there are a lot of myths about that, and there's actually a fair amount of work you can do and money you can earn and still be getting benefits. And there are processes that, have some complications to them, but that help you work yourself off of benefits too, and give you some time to do that. So we want to make sure that people understand that this is a really important part of the process for youth and families as they're thinking about employment. And every situation is a little bit different. So you really want to get benefits counseling on how things are going to affect you and how they're going to affect you right now with the benefits you have right now. So there are lots of different ways to do that. So one is through VR. So they actually offer benefits counseling as part of one of those services listed on your individualized plan for employment can be benefits counseling. So I would, that should be a part of everyone's plan, and I really suggest making sure it's there. If, you're not working with VR yet, or you also have a particular interest in when you get the benefits counseling, there is an agency that does it and at times can contract with VR, or at least they have in the past. They're called the Minnesota Work Incentives Connection at Goodwill Easter Seals, and we put the phone number and the email address at the bottom. So there's a lot of information about benefits counseling out there, and you should definitely look into it because there are a lot of programs, particularly for students. There's the student earned income exception, which means Social Security ignores some of the income you have while you're young and working and you're in school. So definitely look into it before you think we can't work, I can't work, or my child can't work because they're going to lose benefits. Okay, so we've told you a lot, but there's so much more, right? So you want to take a look at some of our fact sheets. The link is on there at the lawhelpmn.org website. VR's website and State Services for the Blind have a lot of information too. Really suggest you take a look there. And then, let's see, I just wanted to tell you about what law applies to VR, not because I expect you want to read all of it, but just so you know, like what's out there. The federal law is part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and then as it was changed, as it was amended by the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act that I mentioned earlier. There's also some state law that we have and some administrative rules. But honestly, the thing that's probably going to help you the most is taking a look at VRS's policies and State Services for the Blind's policies. And VRS's policies are on their website. So I would take a look there. That's really helpful. So some common problems that we see. So one thing is we see people don't know about these services. And we know the agencies are doing outreach, but it's hard to reach everyone, and it's been a complicated couple of years. And things have changed over time. So one thing that's just important, we are trying to get the word out. We're trying to make sure people know about their options. And so we're so glad you're here to kind of learn about it. Another thing we see is, students leaving high school or transition programs, and just things haven't lined up. There's no next plan. And so that's one thing that we think of as super important, is making sure like you've applied for VRS, you are getting VR services, and you have invited that VR counselor to your IEP meetings at school. And if you have a waiver team meetings, so that they are part of the team. And, you can really insist on like, okay, great, it is March and I am graduating this June. Like, we need a plan. What is our plan for what I'm doing? And what are we going to do, and how can you help? And so, I think as both as individuals yourselves, and then family members and support professionals, like, I think you have the right to that expectation that there will be a plan in place. And so we want to make sure people are putting that out there.
I'd like to add, if I can, that vocational rehab services throughout their policy is very, very, their policy and their services are really purposefully led by informed choice. And they use the term informed choice a lot. And for me, what I hear when I hear informed choice is fantastic, people have a choice. But I also, as an advocate, know that that means you kind of have to take the first step. You have to ask and you have to communicate, because if you don't, there's an assumption that you don't want the service. And so that informed choice, and I know students in transition, I've got 3 daughters, and when they start to get to the age of transition, I know that those school counselors and transition experts are talking to students about, you're going to have to learn how to communicate this yourself. You're going to have to learn how to advocate for yourself. And those are really just an important thing to start as soon as you can at the age of 14 on how to communicate that and make sure you're inviting and asking it. And I know parents will be involved in that as well. But at times after school, it will be the person's responsibility to do that. And that can be hard.
And just the other thing I was going to mention, which Deborah, as the special education advocate, would probably know more about than me, but I hear my colleagues who do special education in our office and other advocates talking about one of the ways that students can get involved and advocate for themselves is to start leading those IEP meetings. And so, it could be that the student is starting to lead their own IEP meetings, and they're the one who's responsible for having a calendar reminder that, we're going to invite that VRS counselor 2 weeks before the next meeting. Or, it's not just going to be on you. It's another way to teach youth who are moving into adulthood and moving into taking care of themselves, how they can advocate for themselves and make sure they get the services they need. So the other thing I would just say is that one thing that we're kind of seeing more of lately is there are times, especially during these remarkable times that we're living in, that sometimes you have a need and VRS policy doesn't meet that need. And there are times when an exception makes sense. And people may not realize that you can ask for that exception. So please just ask your VR counselor, say like, look, I get this is the policy, but I have an extraordinary situation here. And particularly when that extraordinary situation is related to your disability, you can ask your VR counselor, and if that is not working, please reach out to us. So, we've told you a ton about what services there are, but what if you're not getting the services? What if there are problems? We keep saying call us, and that's, a solution or a part of a solution. But there are 3 different kind of main avenues to solve a problem besides talking to the counselor and talking to, the counselor supervisor. There's something called informal supervisory review, which is you can get someone else at the agency who's never seen your case before to review the decision to see if it made sense. And that's kind of like the least confrontational way to try to resolve it after you've already tried to talk to the counselor and the supervisor in the office. The next office is mediation, which is a process that you go through where there is an external mediator, so someone who doesn't work for VR, they do work for the state, but they don't know anything about your case, and they just try to mediate or resolve the situation. And in mediation, each side has the choice to agree, and you kind of get to choose what options would be possible for you that you would agree to. And so it can often be a really good way to solve a problem, particularly a problem that has been an issue for a while and you just can't make headway on. Mediation might be a good next step. The other thing is an impartial due process hearing. So this is an administrative law hearing with an administrative law judge. You're not in court, but it's a somewhat similar process. And this is to say, look, VR did not follow the law. They didn't follow the law in my case, and I want you, administrative law judge, to tell them that they made the wrong choice and tell them they have to make a different one. And so this is always something you have the right to request. For VRS, you have 120 days from the date of the written notice to request it. Then in SSB, you have 60 days. You want to request this in writing. It goes to the director of the agency, and you can do more than one. So you can, say, look, I want to mediate the case. I want to do mediation, but I'm going to request the hearing. We're going to put that on hold until we see if we can finish mediation. And if we can't, then we'll have the hearing. But especially if you're thinking if things are that bad, I would really suggest calling us, because you want to make sure, particularly if you request the hearing, that you have all the kind of facts to back you up. You want to have that all ready. And sometimes, we can kind of help you lay the groundwork and make sure you have all those things, the kind of the ducks in a row. And if we think you have a good legal case, then we can represent. Did you have something else? Yeah.
Thanks. I just wanted to say prior to that, and I know we're probably going to skip over some of the other slides, but prior to that, if you have questions or concerns or feel like something is being denied or something's not being done, that in the policy it says they do, on their website it says they do it. The first step oftentimes for self-advocacy as a guardian, even as a provider and or as a service recipient or an individual, is to send an email. And send an email with the questions and with what you want, what service you want and questions you have about that. And just putting it in writing to your counselor is a really important step, because they may respond to that and go, oh, I didn't even know Johnny was interested in that. And I don't remember him saying that during our meeting. So it also, it really opens up for what you want and a direct request and or a problem that you're having, they'll respond to it. But if that problem continues, it also gives us a written record. If you call us to help advocate, it gives us a written record to go, okay, this seems like a reasonable request. This is a service that the person's eligible for. What's going on here and how can we help? So communicate, because they're not going to just automatically know what you need or what you want or what your questions are. So, and there's no shame in just saying, hey, I listened to the Disability Law Center and they said that this is a service you offer. Why hasn't this been offered, or why aren't we doing it this way? That's fine, because they know the CAP project and we're in all of their documents. If you're not happy, they give you a letter and it says call CAP, call the Client Assistance Project. So it's not that it's a big secret of who we are and how we can advocate on behalf of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Such a good point. Putting something in writing is really helpful. Okay, and then I think, do you want to skip ahead 2 slides, Jamie? You can read again about the hearing processes into adulthood. I've mentioned it before, I'll just mention it briefly. It's a project we've been working on, trying to reach youth 14 to 24 as they're thinking about transitioning in lots of different areas, employment, post-secondary. That could mean getting a waiver, it can mean living on your own, health insurance, all of those different things, voting. And if you go to the next slide, we have a website which has a guide, which is also one of your handouts. Talks about a lot of different services so that you can say, okay, like the person who's asking the question, maybe their kid is about to turn 18. What services are available? Because some services change over at 18. Some change at 21, some change at 24. So the point of the guide is hopefully to let you take a look and see, okay, actually this is available and this is available, and that's going to help. We also have some videos on our YouTube page, and we have a couple of podcasts. So we would encourage you to take a look, and we're always looking for people to share their stories. So please, if you have a story, reach out to us, and Delaine and I, our email addresses are at the end of the presentation. And with that, I think I will take it to Delaine, and then we have about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I am going to go really quick through the next few slides. We included some waiver employment slides, home and community-based waivered services. If a young adult or a child is eligible for those, they also have services that help people who are seeking employment. And I'm just, again, I just put the links on here as far as you can look at those yourselves, but if you are eligible for a waiver or you want to see if you are, you can call the county for a min choices assessment. If you become eligible for a waiver, these are 3 employment services that person can get at no cost to themselves or their family for employment exploration, development, and support. There's a new effort in Minnesota. There's a lot of new changes going on in Minnesota, but one of them is to get the Department of Human Services, which handles the waivers, voc rehab services and state services for the blind, and even the Department of Education to all work together to help transition youth and to work together at the same table to make sure that individuals with disabilities have access to the services and the correct services. So we want to share that. And the next 2 slides, if you can go to the next one, shows you what it's supposed to look like. These are taken directly from the Department of Human Services. So this is what's supposed to be happening for your student, to engage and to plan with voc rehab and your school in the group setting with pre-employment, and then to find employment and to keep employment. And that's for youth. And so it's just look at how that beautiful flow is. That's what it's supposed to look like. If it's not looking like that, then we need to communicate with the school and voc rehab services to get people around the table and make sure that you've got an employment plan and it's in your education plan. And they got people at the table who've been invited who are now going to help. Next slide. This is the same thing for adults, an agreement of how to work together with waivered services and voc rehab and SSB. And next slide. And then here's some links with information about waivered services. We also do at the Disability Law Center handle cases for people who are denied waivers, or some services under the waiver are not approved, or you're having problems with a case manager or with a service provider. So we just want to make sure that we include a little bit about waivers in this presentation. When to contact the Disability Law Center. I can't remember if Kristina or I are supposed to talk about this, but I'm not seeing her. Just get started. You can contact us anytime, but ideally, because we are a law office, I typically, and I think most of the advocates and attorneys, advise people to do some advocacy on your own, to ask for services, to be assessed for eligibility, and contact us if you're denied services, or if your services are reduced or terminated, or you're having a problem. And the barrier to employment, or the barrier to your community, or to a building, or in barriers to any programs are presented and you're not getting the help you need, you can call the Disability Law Center. So we handle cases for waivers, which includes PCA, case management, and transportation issues. We have a special education team that does dynamite work, making sure that children have access to a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. We work with our client assistance, or CAP project, for voc rehab and SSB, and we also have we also help people get access to employment networks. And if you need a reasonable accommodation, we have an access and discrimination team that specializes in some of those works, including training, access to training programs, colleges or universities, accommodations and modifications under the ADA and 504 plan. So next slide. You can also contact us if you're denied access into, like I said, buildings or programs, community programs or services, and or if you have a barrier to fully participate in the community. If you show up somewhere, or your son or daughter does, and they are excluded from anything that's funded with state, federal, or local dollars, that's a discrimination issue, and that should be addressed, and you could call the Disability Law Center if you can't get it resolved yourself. If you think your legal rights are violated at any time where you're not being respected, again, you can contact us. Or if you have a question about your rights as a person with a disability, and I just want to again say, if you're a service provider and something doesn't seem right, or you cannot figure out what the problem is, and a person with a disability seems to be mistreated or excluded unfairly, you can call us for technical assistance, and we can give you information to share with the person or the family. And it may be some information about the law, and then it may be refer them to our intake line, because it sounds like something that we could help with.
Thank you for watching, and a special thanks to Kristina and Delaine of the Minnesota Disability Law Center. For more resources, go to pacer.org. Pacer Center is here to help. Contact us at transition@pacer.org or pacer@pacer.org. You can also call us at 952-838-9000 or look at more of our resources at pacercenter.org/transition.